Okay. So, whenever I talk about systems, and I honestly am becoming less affectionate toward that word systems, because as I am moving through the world with this film and having these conversations, what I'm realizing increasingly is that while I grew up with that word systems being a kind of a warm reference to a larger set of organisms that we live within, or small, that in the world we live in, it's something very mechanistic. If you Google
it kind of represents this idea of dry graphic.
Absolutely. If you Google systems theory and hit images, what you're going to get is all these ridiculous diagrams that bear no resemblance to anything that I ever thought of as a system.
Yeah.
So I use the term loosely, and I'd rather use the term context. I've heard people say dynamical context. Whatever. I mean, basically what we're talking about is, at the largest level, the universe, the biosphere, and all the way down to the nature of the smallest atomic relationships. So it scales up, it scales down. The best entry point into the question of what is a system, I think, is to just look at the body. It's the system that you live inside of. And it's your system. Yeah. And you know it intrinsically. You know, if your baby toe is hurting, it affects the way that you walk, which is going to affect what you can do that day, which is going to affect whether or not you're going to get to go see your girlfriend, or whether or not it's going to be possible to go to work and make money. I mean, these are little tiny pieces that fit into larger pieces that fit into larger pieces that are all moving. So within the body, you've got the perfect scenario where your lungs do something different than your heart, does something different than your nervous system, than your ability to perceive, than your whole language and linguistical system.
And they work in this integrated way, or this coupling. Yeah.
They work in relationship. They work in an integration. They work on an integration. They work with an integration. And it's a constant
And they
process.
make their own integration. That is an interesting thing, that they actually create their own relationship.
They do, and they compensate for each other. Yeah. You know, if it's hot outside, you breathe differently, and your sweat glands open, and you are hungry for different things, and you decide that you want to do different things. So the body is the first and most friendly entry point to the notion of systems. And I think it's a good one, because then when you project out from there and you start to look at, for example, relationships within a family as also being a system, you can start to think of that as, okay, well, maybe I'm the lungs and you're the heart, and he's the nervous system, and this person's the cognition, and how are we all functioning together? What are we all bringing to this system that is our household? And you can start to overlay patterns to cross-reference in that way. But let's look at that for a second, because the point is this: it's not a truck. You know, when something goes wrong in a car, you can replace a part. And you can say, this is the part that's not working, let's fix it. But when something goes haywire in a living system, in a living dynamic context, whether it's a pond or your body or a family conversation or a city social structure or an institution of a school, it's not like a car. You can't go looking for the solution in that linear way. There's no piece you can replace, because all the pieces have moved. All the pieces are learning and growing and moving and changing. So, you know, you go to put something in or take something out, and everything has been in reaction and relation to whatever the change is. So how do you begin then to to ask questions, which I think is more important than finding answers. How do you begin to ask questions that reach toward what I would like to refer to as a non-trivial level of relationship with the system? If you have something that you feel is some sort of pathology, and I use that term loosely because I'm working with that term right now. How do you begin to deal with that? How do you broach it? Because there's so much that we can't see. I have only my frame of reference. I have only my epistemology, my perception. And by definition, that's limited. I can only see a tiny piece of these big circles that are moving. So anything that I choose to do that I see as being the answer or the solution is bound to be limited by that. And that brings up a really big paradox of how do you...
How are we going to change it?
How do you change something when you know that the change you're going to make is by definition limited?
Limited, yeah.
And, you can say, well, you have to take responsibility for what you do.
Or like a lot of people can say, well, we have to be systemic, but what does it mean? and how do we do it?
Yeah, and how do we do it? And so my dad talked about this thing that he called the pattern that connects. And I think it's a useful tool because it does a couple of things. First of all, what is that?
Yes.
And I think that's okay. If we don't know what the pattern that connects is. The quest for it is a noble quest, and that's enough. The uncertainty of knowing that whatever those patterns are, they're moving, they're in process, is a kind of openness. It lets us know that the structure of the way things come to be, the order of how things are, that structure is open. It has to be open. If it's not open, it's over. It has to be growing and expanding and contracting and breathing, just like your body.